Leadership is really about the relationships we create, and it's about the conversations we have with others, whether those that we lead or those who lead us. And it's about the conversations we as leaders need to initiate, whether we are in charge or not. Because an organization is really a network of conversations. And the way that we communicate in those conversations is not just about the words we speak, it's also about how we show up when we are with those people. And the way we show up has to do with how we are perceived, or how we treat others, or how we listen or don't listen, or how we agree or how we disagree. A great deal of our communication is in the how of how we do something. So it's important to weave oneself into the core fabric of the institution at which we're a part by assuming that we are another profession, another discipline, not in a defensive way, but demonstrating and taking the initiative, not waiting for someone to ask you to prove your worth, lining up your stakeholders, volunteering to be on the ethics committee, or defining the criteria of your credibility and relevance before someone else does it for you. Assume that you need to be needed, and assume that you need to be valued in whatever it is that your position is. Don't doubt it. Just because you don't do brain surgery in a hospital doesn't mean you don't do something important. Unpack what it means to see the value and the power of a kind stranger who takes time to notice things, or bringing a unique lens to seeking the patient or incarcerated in a different yet important way. And learning how to talk about it and practice talking about it, going deeper into describing your criteria that you use for measuring results. So you're assuming that you have value rather than appearing to be on the defensive. And as we've mentioned, to use common and shared language, and this may mean retooling ourselves in the secular vein, because the venue we serve is our church, and we must communicate in their language, not necessarily our language. So we need to unpack what we mean. What I mean by unpack, I come across this a lot in the work that I do with senior leaders who, when they write a performance appraisal, will say, well, so-and-so is very effective in what they do. I hope that they continue to do what they're doing. And I kind of laugh internally and say, well, what exactly did you observe, and what is your definition of effectiveness? Because they didn't say anything about that. They didn't give me any real information that is going to be helpful to me. So with those keywords like effective, even to communicate, what does it mean to communicate? How does your supervisor like to be communicated with? Would they prefer written communication or verbal? All of those things is what it means to unpack the word that we're talking about. Communicating your metrics through the organization, communicating through your whole person, your language, your mood, your body, accurately and honestly. And how do you communicate that you're accessible to people? What does accessibility look like to your stakeholder, to your customer? So those are some of the questions and the bullets that are on the slide before you. I think that we can move on to the next one, Bruce. T. Boone Pickens began a testimony once with a folksy homily saying that his parents told him, "Son, a fool with a plan can be a genius with no plan." And strategic plans often fail to produce the results they want because 90% of the organizations fail to execute them successfully. They fail to lay out how one is going to achieve it. In the end, it's a matter of alignment and follow-through. And so what you see on the slide is basically a directional for you in terms of how to go about creating your strategic vision and objectives and working through them. What do we want to be in the future? How do we intend to accomplish that? What must we complete to move forward? What areas must we focus on to achieve our vision? What is our metric? What are our metric indicators of success? To answer these questions in that order, to help us have a game plan, the process of alignment is about bringing together our vision and our actions, and I think this is what this particular chart gives us. A way of looking at what measurement is in terms of that alignment, you'll see in a quote in the next slide. It's a quote from Patrick Lencioni. The key to establishing effective measures for a job lies in identifying those areas that an employee can directly influence and then ensuring that the specific measurements are connected to the person or people that they are meant to serve. Failing to link measurement to relevance is illogical and creates confusion among employees who are left wondering why they aren't measuring the most important parts of their jobs. What I find a lot in working with the leaders that I work with in private sector and in government is that oftentimes the conditions of satisfaction of which I've mentioned are not spelled out in the original conversation. So your supervisor comes to you or your board of directors comes to you and says, we want this kind of program to occur, and you say, yes, I can do that. And then you go and fail really to engage them in a further conversation of, at the end of the day, what do you want to have happen because of this program? What are your expectations? What are the things that you want? What are the things you don't want? And many times I see in terms of failure is that people say, well, I want an increase of 25%. And then the person goes, you go, and you do what you think you need to do in order to achieve that 25% increase in whatever it is that you're working on. You come back to your supervisor, you say, here it is, and they say, well, that's not really what I wanted. Yeah, you got me the 25% increase, but you've also alienated everyone else in the process. And I didn't want that. Well, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I'm talking about making sure that you understand all of the conditions of satisfaction. And again, taking on that attitude of curiosity and asking those kinds of questions at the beginning of the conversation so that when you go to roll out whatever it is that you're going to roll out, you're all on the same page about what you mean by something. So another word that often is used is, well, I want there to be a more increased collaboration. Well, a question that I might ask at that point is, well, tell me what collaboration looks like to you. And at the end of the day, what do you want to have accomplished? How will things be different 6 months from now or a year from now because of the way in which you look at collaboration differently? Let's go on to the next slide. So there are many methods for measuring results, and it has a lot to do with what you want and what you choose to measure. For most organizations today want to measure what they say is that return on investment that I've mentioned before. And to conduct a true ROI is a very expensive thing, especially when it's a financial ROI. It becomes a soundbite for what does this service provide us, or is this aspect of our program important enough to continue, or is this activity turning a profit in our organization? It matters whether you're focusing on numeric metrics or behavioral ones, and to get that clear is really important. Again, Patrick Lencioni, in his book, 3 Signs of a Miserable Job, has this wonderful quote where he says, business measurements need not be completely quantitative to be effective. In many cases, trying to over-quantify measurables by assigning strictly numeric measurements makes them irrelevant because the metric is artificial. The most effective and appropriate measurement are often behavioral in nature and might simply call for an informal survey of customers or merely observations of behavior that indicate satisfaction. So we've already seen how paying attention to our customers and stakeholders can give us valuable information as to what they care about. And what people care about has a lot to do with what they want to measure. So your organization also gives us important information as to what it cares about and potentially what they want to monitor and ultimately measure. So the questions on this slide suggest some of the thinking that we need to do from the first day that we're on the job. Do your organization's measures reflect strategic drivers? Does your organization name key performance indicators, which are meant to help an organization define and measure progress toward their goals? What measures do staff members care about? If you don't know, ask them. What measures do doctors or nurses or healthcare providers or military personnel or prison staff care about? Again, ask them if you don't know or you can't find that. What measures do board members and administrators care about? What measures do patients care about? How do the above measures intersect with what you do in your work? So looking at these particular questions is an important way of gaining the information and going to the people. If you don't have it, don't stop there. Go and get it. Bruce, I think you're going to go on to the next slide.
What you have before you on this slide is an example of measurement development, and I would ask you to also turn to attachments 5, 6, and 7 at this point. One of the things that we thought would be helpful for you is to at least give you an example of our own development of an outcome-based measurement. And so we took an example out of UMEA as we are trying to develop our own potential outcome measures and to show our relevance to the agency and to the church at large. And so what we did is that we staffed and we kind of, on one particular need, we were beginning to look at, well, what are the needs of our community and what are the needs of the church? And so we identified those needs and we tried to write up in some way a goal that we could begin to achieve. And you may have several that relate to the needs that are there. And if you look at attachment 5, you will see in one of the assignment opportunities you have to take a particular identified need and write up different types of goals that may respond to that need, and then choose one of those goals. And then what we did is we decided to take a look at, well, what are the outputs that we could bring to addressing that outcome? And so we staffed trying to figure out what are the resources that we have staffing-wise and funding-wise, and what are the things that we're going to bring to that cause. And then simultaneously, we tried to say, well, what would help us show the evidence that the change occurred? Remember, this is all about change occurring, and so what could we do in order to generate that kind of response? So this slide gives an example of something that we would be looking at in terms of our role here at GBHEM as the endorsing agency. So the attachment 5 is basically an example of a worksheet for you to take an identified need and to try to structure it in some way that would give you a form of guidance for the future. Number 6, attachment number 6, as you know, we've just come through General Conference and we are now in the process of trying to determine what the priorities of the agency is and then what the priorities of UMEA are that are driven by the agency, driven by the discipline, and how are we going to support that in meeting the needs both of the church and of the agency. So you have a draft of some things that we've been working on, not approved yet, so remember, this is a draft. There's nothing official about that, but what we wanted you to see was what the drivers are, and the drivers are the priorities of the agency. So if the agency adopts these priorities for us, you will know what's going to drive the strategic planning. Then what we did is we took those particular priorities and adopted or began to create or have begun to create action plans with measurable indicators that are tied to that, and you will see in that particular example before you of one of the ways that we would try to address that. And so in our strategic planning, over the course of the quadrennium, we're going to try to show the evidence or gather the evidence that says, well, this is where we become relevant. It's a matter of responding to our community, but also linking our community to the church at large, and then allowing the church at large to begin to hear the stories of our community about how you all are extending ministry on behalf of the church into the community at large. But again, these are the things that are occupying UMEA's agenda at the present time as we try to figure out where our development goes in the future. The last thing that I put there for you is the development of evidence-based outcomes. It's a guide sheet. It's basically meant to be an assist as you begin to think through the development of outcome or evidence-based goals and the reminders that are important for you in that process. Again, we'll kind of come back to each of this here in a few moments when we look at the assignments. But I think, Lee, for the interest of time, we need to move on.
Great. The next slide is basically a summary, and as you'll recall, we've been focusing the last half hour or so on how to get the results, and we've focused on paying attention, communicating, aligning, and measuring and monitoring results. And this is just a slide to summarize for you the last part about collaboration and soliciting feedback. And we've mentioned a number of these things throughout our webinar today. To do this with your stakeholders, with the ones you're willing to speak for you, because sometimes you need to find someone else to speak for you because you're just not able to. You're not able to get through to someone. With the ones who have shared interests and colleagues, and with those who appear not to care. All of these parties, we want to continuously and continually collaborate with and solicit feedback. Moving on to the next slide, you'll have some bulleted suggestions here for how to move from relevance into the right direction. I just want to commend your patience and understanding of our presentation today and the process here. And our intent has not been to bring you to completion, but to really help you see a process for thinking through and communicating your alignment and your value and thus relevancy.